Somewhere in Texas, there's a roof that weighs as much as 20 Boeing 737 airplanes. It's made of steel, it's the size of a city block, and every single time it opens, gravity is fighting to rip it apart. In 2026, this roof is going to sit above more World Cup matches than any other stadium in America. But here's the part nobody talks about. Back when this thing was being built, the engineers in charge hit a wall. A 1,500-ton roof. No pillars, no walls, and arches tilted at a 30-degree angle, which meant opening this roof was basically like dragging the weight of 20 airplanes straight up a hill. They brought in dozens of engineers. Every single idea failed. And the thing that finally cracked it? It wasn't some genius from MIT or NASA. It was a guy who sold meat for a living. 150 years before this stadium was even a sketch on paper. Stick around, because this is one of the wildest engineering stories you'll hear all year. Guys, welcome back to Kenful TV, the stadium. So let's talk about the building itself, because honestly, the numbers don't even make sense at first. This is AT&T Stadium, sitting in Arlington, Texas, and it's the largest stadium in the entire United States. 80,000 seats, a footprint of 30,000 square feet. But the real flex is the volume. The inside of this stadium is 3 million cubic meters of empty space. That's so big. You could fit the entire footprint of the Great Pyramid of Giza inside it and still have room for thousands of fans. Or try this one. Take the Statue of Liberty, lift it off its base, and set it down in the middle of this stadium. It still wouldn't touch the roof. Now picture this place fully built out. Arches with 0 pillars holding them up. A 1,500-ton roof that slides open like a sunroof. Central air conditioning for the entire building. And glass entrance doors as tall as a 12-story office tower. All of that had to be invented for one simple reason. In 2006, the NFL needed a new home in Texas, and the Dallas Cowboys made one thing very clear. They didn't want a stadium that sat empty 355 days a year, only waking up for 8 or 10 football games. They wanted a building that could make money every single day. And in Texas, a state that swings between brutal winter storms and summers that feel like standing inside an oven, that meant one thing. This building had to be sealed, climate-controlled, and usable in any weather all year round. The pillar problem. Here's where things start going wrong almost immediately. Normally, easy. You want to hold up a massive roof, you stick pillars underneath it. Problem solved. Except pillars block sightlines. And in a stadium, sightlines are everything. The more pillars you add, the worse the experience gets for the people who actually paid for tickets. So the architect on this project, a guy named Bryant Truby, was handed a brief that sounded almost like a joke. Build us a massive roof. Don't use any pillars. Truby would later say this was the single hardest challenge of his entire career. And it gets worse. Because this roof wasn't just holding itself up. It also had to support the world's largest LED screen at the time. A screen so heavy, on its own, it weighed 600,000 kilograms. Add that to the roof, and you're looking at a combined load of roughly 2,100 tons, resting on a structure with nothing underneath it. So how do you support that much weight with literally nothing touching the ground in the middle? The answer was sitting in a forgotten bridge from over a century ago. The bridge that solved it. Let's rewind. Way back. 1875, Portugal. Engineers are laying down a railway line and they hit a problem. The Douro River, 170 meters wide, 20 meters deep, and moving so fast that building support pillars in the water just wasn't going to happen. So they called in a French engineer, a guy named Gustave Eiffel. Yeah, that Eiffel. Eiffel's solution was to build a single massive arch, stretching from one bank of the river to the other. No pillars, no supports in the water, just one giant curve of metal holding everything up. At the time, people thought this was insane. An arch that big with nothing holding it from below? It shouldn't have worked. But it did. And the reason why is honestly one of the coolest things in engineering. If you looked closely at that arch, it wasn't one solid piece. It was made of hundreds of tiny triangles, all locked together. And triangles are special. No matter how much force you put on a triangle, it can bend, it can even break. But its shape physically cannot collapse the way a square or rectangle can. Engineers call this a truss system. And it's the exact same idea, scaled up massively, that ended up holding together AT&T Stadium. Building the arches. So here's what they actually built. Two arches, each one 1,400 feet long, 14 feet thick, and 35 feet deep. For comparison, that's longer than 4 football fields laid end to end. All of that weight comes down onto just 4 points. Massive concrete abutments spaced 400 meters apart. Each one of these abutments used enough concrete to build around 200 houses. But there was a catch. The arches were made of steel, and in Texas heat, steel expands a lot. If they bolted that steel directly onto the concrete, the arches would have literally pushed and cracked the foundations apart during a hot summer. So engineers added something called expansion joints, small gaps between the steel and the concrete that let the whole structure shift and breathe as the temperature changes. 8 months later, the impossible roof structure was standing, a massive pillar-free shell with one final detail, a rectangular opening cut right into the center as a tribute to the Cowboys' old stadium. But that opening was about to become the hardest part of the entire project. The retractable roof nightmare, because that opening needed a roof of its own, one that could close completely when the weather turned bad and open up when it didn't. And here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. The retractable panels needed to cover this opening weighed more combined than 10 blue whales. The blue whale, the heaviest animal that has ever existed on this planet. Now imagine sliding that along steeply angled arches using motors and cables. The moment you start opening that roof, gravity takes over. It wants to pull those panels down. Holding them back and pulling them open is like trying to drag the weight of 10 blue whales straight up against gravity the entire time. To make this even remotely possible, engineers split the roof into 2 equal halves so the weight stayed balanced on both sides of the arch. But here's the problem with just using cables and winches. Lifting 1,500 tons that way would need at least 3,000 tons of pulling force. And if even one of those winches moved a fraction of a second faster than the other, the whole truss goes off balance. Worse, if a single steel cable snapped under that kind of load, you're not looking at a malfunction, you're looking at a disaster. So once again, the answer wasn't something new. It was something 150 years old, invented by a businessman who wasn't even thinking about stadiums. The businessman who solved it, meet Sylvester Marsh, 19th century. By profession, he worked in meatpacking. But on the weekends, Marsh had one obsession, hiking Mount Washington in New Hampshire. The problem was, this mountain was so brutal that most tourists who tried climbing it gave up halfway and turned back. So in 1869, Marsh designed something new, a railway track that could grip a mountain. He called it the Cog Railway, also known as the Rack Railway. Here's how it worked. Down the middle of the track, there's a rail with gear teeth cut into it. That's the rack. The train itself has a matching gear underneath it, the pinion. When the pinion locks into the rack, the train can climb insanely steep slopes without ever slipping. And to stop it from sliding backward, a locking mechanism only let the gear turn in one direction. If you've ever ridden a roller coaster or a cog railway and heard that constant clack, clack, clack sound on the climb, that's this exact mechanism, still working over 150 years later. This became known as the rack and pinion system. Rack and pinion at AT&T Stadium. And this is what they used to move a 1,500-ton roof. That long track you can spot running along the AT&T Stadium roof, that's the rack. And gripping onto it, moving the panels, is the pinion. To power this, they installed 130 separate motors, each one 7.5 horsepower. When the roof closes, those motors drive the pinion forward. When it opens, those same motors act as brakes, controlling the descent so gravity doesn't win. And because every gear is exactly the same fixed size, both halves of the roof move at the exact same speed every single time, keeping the weight perfectly balanced on both sides. The result? A 1,500-ton roof that opens fully in 12 minutes and closes in another 12. cooling a stadium the size of a city block. Now, once that roof is closed, you've got a sealed building in Texas in the summer, which means somebody has to cool down 3 million cubic meters of air. For reference, that's the equivalent of 75,000 hotel rooms all at once. Or think of it this way, it's like cooling down 3 Burj Khalifa towers top to bottom simultaneously. Most home AC units are rated at 1.5 to 4 tons. AT&T Stadium runs a chiller system rated at 11,000 tons, pumping air through ducts that are 6 feet wide. And here's the clever part. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so the system drops cold air down from above the seating, letting it sink naturally over the crowd and down onto the field. Meanwhile, the warm air, being lighter, rises up into the open space above the field, where it gets pulled out and recycled. Basic physics, massive scale. The world's biggest screen. Now remember that LED screen we mentioned earlier, the one that added 600,000 kilograms to the roof's load? When it was installed, it was the largest LED screen on Earth. Over 10 million individual LEDs, standing as tall as a 10-story building, and hanging 50 meters directly above the playing field. Its total surface area is roughly the size of a 3,000 square foot lot, meaning no matter where your seat is in this 80,000 person stadium, that screen is visible. The glass doors. Then there's the entrance. Glass doors as tall as a 12-story building. These aren't single sheets of glass. They're built from multiple panels joined together, each one weighing around 86,000 kilograms. And just like the roof, these massive insulated glass doors run on the same rack and pinion system. Opening or closing them completely takes about 18 minutes. The grass problem. Okay, now here's where things get really interesting for 2026. AT&T Stadium's field normally sits on artificial turf laid over concrete, so it can be swapped out depending on the event. But FIFA has a rule: World Cup matches have to be played on real grass, not turf. So the Dallas Cowboys are spending $300 million to make that happen. And here's the problem. How exactly do you grow real grass on top of concrete inside a building whose roof doesn't even fully open? The solution? They're raising the entire field by 6 inches, installing a drainage system underneath to manage water, and adding artificial UV lighting to make up for the sunlight the grass won't naturally get. But the wildest part? The grass for the World Cup isn't even being grown inside the stadium. It's being grown on a farm in Colorado and trucked in on refrigerated trailers just before each match. On top of all that, the stadium's capacity is being expanded from 80,000 to 94,000 seats for the tournament. FIFA World Cup 2026 at AT&T Stadium. When the World Cup arrives, AT&T Stadium will host 9 matches total, including a semi-final on July 14th. The very first match here kicks off on June 14th, and once the tournament ends, the real grass comes out and the turf goes right back in. A stadium built to break the rules of engineering, now bending the rules one more time, just for one summer. I hope you'll like and share Kenful TV's videos, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in another awesome video soon. Until then, bye bye and love you all.